to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Dr. Lona Bailey. Lona, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yes, thank you so much, Jen. I'm excited.
I'm excited you are here, and I would love for you to start with apparently my favorite question. How did you get into writing?
Oh, that is a great question. Well, I think I was born a writer, maybe like so many of us who write. It's just sort of in us, and we have to gravitate toward that industry as we get older. But yeah, I think as a kid, I was a big reader, and naturally that sort of spurred my own creativity in writing my own stories and piecing plots together with characters. And I was kind of, I guess, as a kid, more of a fiction writer, like so many kids are. But of course, now I do nonfiction and love the biography work. And I love the research involved and sharing stories that really haven't been shared before about these wonderfully fascinating women that many of them are in radio, old time radio, but certainly film and television too. So, yeah, I guess the short answer is I was born a writer, and then it took me a few years, to kind of figure out what my niche really was. But I think I've hit on it, and I don't know how good I am at it, but I really, really enjoy it. So I'll say it that way.
I love that. And you have touched on something that I think is really cool. So, the fact that you are writing biographies, I feel like that taps into some of the skills that you learn in school in the context of so you have to research and you have to have some clarity about what you're going to write about. But with biography, that is, I mean, you are looking at someone's real life. So you want to capture that. You want to research as much as you can to get all different vantage points, not just one vantage point. You want to be able to pull it together, and you want that person to feel alive in the book just as they did in real life. How do you go
Yes.
about that kind of research?
Yes, very meticulously. Um, yeah, it is. It's sort of like bringing someone back to life in a sense through their narrative. And I'm from the South, and my accent gives me away, but Southerners, we're really nosy a lot of times, right? And so I'm pretty nosy, so I'm good at the research part. But yeah, finding out sort of the facts is really, really interesting, but then placing those facts and a narrative, that's the really fun part because you can color, these just black and white facts, and it's really, really fun. So certainly there's a lot of research that goes into fiction, but the nonfiction is great because you kind of have these like puzzle pieces that are out there in the abyss, and then you get to sort of piece them together into a cohesive narrative. And it really is like bringing them back to life, as I said. And it's always so sad at the end of the books because I tell my husband all the time when I'm finishing one, I said, they die in the end. Who wrote this book? And he said, well, yeah, of course, but it's almost like I get so involved in learning who these women are that it's sort of sad, at the end because you have to say, well, this was their life story, and now what we have left is their legacy. I try to be very respectful and peeling back the layers of these women's lives because we all know examples of legacy preservation that's perhaps gone awry. So somebody had a certain life, and then maybe a writer, or whether it's unwittingly or not, they come along and say, well, I really think it was this way, or I think it was that way, and then suddenly we're left with maybe conflicting stories. So I really try to be, as nosy as I am, I really try to be respectful of these women and of course their families, because so many of them still have families that are contributing to the book. And so I like to go around and collect, I guess you could say, just different perspectives of the same person in so much as I'm able to, because of course several of them have been gone for several years, and so it's often hard to track down these eyewitnesses, that knew these women and can contribute these intimate memories of them. But I've been really fortunate so far, and I've connected with some awesome people that have given me wonderful viewpoints of these ladies that otherwise we wouldn't have. So there's a lot of really interesting stories kind of hidden, in the wings of old Hollywood, I think.
Okay, so you are tapping so many. This is so cool. So many questions are coming up for me, but like one of the first ones is, how do you know when you need to stop the research?
Mm,
Because that is something you could continually polish that stone and polish that stone until
yes.
and almost focus so much on the research and not get to the writing part. So how do you balance that? How do you know when to stop?
Yes, that's a great question. And it's very hard. It can get kind of dicey because you think, how much of this is me telling the story and then how much of it is like my own stuff that I'm basically laying over onto the story. And it is a delicate process to figure out, when you're done and also kind of where these ladies' narratives begin and where my own begins. Because again, I get pretty wrapped up in these things. So it's like, how much of the story am I telling for my own benefit versus the benefit of the story itself? And I think one somebody asked me a similar question the other day in an interview, and I think the best way I can answer that is to say my own life is a wonderful current to kind of push me on toward the finish. So in other words, I could really get down into the details and stay there because it's just a wonderful story and process. But I have three small kids, so I have to sort of wrap it up. And so a lot of my own present reality is wonderful motivation for me to say, okay, I really have to be disciplined in how much time that I can devote to each piece of the process. So that's kind of the short answer there. But it's really fun to get into the details and it can be pretty arresting sometimes. So you have to put some boundaries up.
That's fair. So I can imagine that you would look at newspaper clippings, you could look
Hmm.
at different other interviews or other written material about the person that you're going to write about. But
Hmm.
how do you go about identifying and connecting with the, like as you call them, eyewitnesses?
Yeah, so I've been really fortunate with the radio ladies because I'm connected with a couple of preservation societies that have a lot of folks that either, they're archivists in the radio world, or some of them actually were performers on radio. A few of them are still with us. And so it's wonderful to have this database of folks that I can say, hey, did you know this person or this person? And a lot of them do. A lot of them that are still with us have wonderful recollections of that era, but also just passing down from maybe good friends or family members. And every now and then I'll step on kind of a landmine with that. And somebody says, oh no, I could just never talk to you for a biography. They get maybe a little overwhelmed by the prospect. But for the most part, I've been really fortunate and I've connected with people that see the value in what I'm doing and trying to tell the story of maybe their good friend or their family member, and I certainly try to be respectful in that process, like I said, and I let folks read what I've written, and if they have, things they want to suggest or rework, I try to be mindful of that. But yeah, just I've been really fortunate through these preservation societies. Other than that, sometimes it's just kind of a cold call because I find these folks and I just say, hey, this is who I am, and I don't know if you'd be willing to talk to me, but this is kind of what I'm trying to do. And again, some people are great about it, and then some people are just like, "Ah, it's not really my thing. I don't really want to, deal with that." So, and that's okay too. So I just try to be open-minded when I go in with a request.
Okay, so what I am hearing too is like when you were talking earlier about puzzling. So you're
Hmm.
getting, and I puzzle books together. I've had a couple episodes about this even, but the idea of having your different pieces and it starts to kind of come together, but it's not
Hmm.
necessarily coming together in sequential order. It's coming together in different snippets almost, and then you are figuring out how they belong. So
Hmm.
I almost hear a process that might be, I'm starting this research. I've got some parts. I might be putting the book together. Oh, wait, I don't have enough information over here. This is where I need to go do some digging.
Hmm.
And then coming back out, life helping you or what have
Yeah.
you, or
Yes.
feeling, no, I think this is what I need. And then figuring out, does that still belong? So I almost hear it kind of coming together in that way. And then still going back through saying, is this still the right flow? Is this still the right, does this
Hmm.
still make sense? Am I still telling this story the way I want it to represent that person?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And that's what makes it so tedious because just like our lives aren't linear. Not really. They maybe seem that way if we're sort of looking back on things, but they certainly don't feel linear when we're in the moment because we get hit with all kinds of stuff from all different angles. But that's kind of, yeah, it's a reflection of life, and the process itself. So yes, it's a delicate process, but it's very fun.
Very true. And so, so memoir is really when you're writing essentially, and you are pulling out one or several themes. It might be it has themes and it has specific situations or experiences that you are really trying to tell. It's not your whole life. It's
Hmm.
not from that stand, and it's not necessarily chronological. It could be, but it doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily have to be. But with biography, it would be chronological,
Hmm.
and it wouldn't it you would have many more details going on in there versus just this one isolated or two isolated incidences, or looking at a broader theme and choosing different incidences that align to that particular theme.
Hmm.
So when you were working on, as you work on a biography, are you identifying a theme or seeing a theme that comes through so that there's another form of connection that's happening?
I think so. Yeah, I think because I'm so passionate about the legacy preservation with these fascinating feministic icons, that maybe we just haven't heard as much about because they were kind of in the wings of Hollywood. They're not the A-listers necessarily that we think of. Just the themes of motherhood, of feminine empowerment, and kind of pulling those themes out of an era that maybe isn't necessarily associated with those things readily, and maybe not so much, as they are today. And so, for example, with Betty's book, I think, politically, she was not necessarily a feminist in her era. But now I think we can look back on some of those things and say, well, but really you were a champion for women in a certain way. And so pulling those things again out of the era specific context and saying, hey, maybe we have more in common than what we thought. Because I think we can tend to just, in terms of history, we can say, well, we put our own lens on these past events and these past people and kind of what they stood for. But really, it might just take a little bit of different interpretation to say, I think we could maybe have more connection points than what we thought.
So with that, you specifically enjoy the old age Hollywood, as you said.
Yes, yes.
What is it about that era?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've always connected with that era. The films were just incredible. I think I mean, certainly television, was great too, but I think just the old kind of that gothic glory, of the 20s and 30s and 40s. In the 50s, we kind of saw some breakdown in that, and then we kind of moved into like a totally new era in terms of film and television too. But I don't know. I think I just like it.
And I get that too, because
Hmm.
sometimes when you just have that passion for it, when you have that curiosity for it, you naturally enjoy what you're doing, and that joy is
Yes.
going to come through in your, regardless of what genre you're writing. Even if you're writing something that has a creepy factor or whatever, if
Right.
you are enjoying what you're doing, you know it just feels a little different. You can
Hmm.
tell that things just, there's more depth. It almost feels like those characters
Hmm.
feel more vibrant. And when it's nonfiction, you still can feel the joy. You can still feel the passion that's behind what's being written when that exists.
Hmm.
So I love that. So talk to me about this new book. How did this book come about? Why did you pick the actress you did? Talk to me about it.
Yeah, no, that's great. So it came out last January. I think the timestamp is like December of 2 years ago, but it came out last January. And it really was released after months and months of connecting with Betty. And I probably would have to point the finger at my oldest daughter for getting interested in this project because I mean, I'm a millennial, and so I grew up with the original Disney 101 Dalmatians. And so my oldest daughter got really interested in that when she was younger, so a couple of years ago. And, it was on repeat all the time. She had to just watch only that movie. And so I became really curious about the voices. I'm like, these are great voices. And I had just stepped out of doing my first biography, Virginia Gregg, who was also a radio queen. And so I had kind of bumped into Betty's radio career in doing the research for Virginia. And so when I saw that that was her, I thought, wow, that is great. I mean, this voice of villainy, that like everybody knows Corella. And to think that, maybe you had the voice that was so identified with wickedness for generations to come. It's like that is like what a legacy that is. And one of the things that stood out the most to me with Betty is that even though she has this iconic, almost kind of British voice, she is a small town Southern gal just like me. And so she was born just down the road from me, about an hour, which is like really weird because nobody is born here. It's like nobody is born here. And it was really interesting to think that this voice that is known, worldwide was just kind of a small town Southern gal. And so I did some just basic digging and realized, she doesn't have a biography, but she has a great story, as most people do. And so I was able to connect with some of her family. She has a nephew that's still living, and certainly the Radio Preservation Society, they had a lot of archive information on her and recollections. And so just accessing that was like, oh, I mean, it was like wonderful. It was so great, so fun. So I think I would have to blame my oldest daughter for really finding, such a gem in terms of a story in Betty.
But what I hear too is, you know, it kind of goes back to that following that passion and that curiosity in the sense
Mhm.
that, hey, this voice, she's so distinctive. And then looking into her a little bit more and saying, I think I would enjoy this. And then
Mhm.
blending that love of research. But the fact that I mean, it comes from love. I mean,
Yeah.
it's something you grew up with, your daughter enjoys, and
Yes.
to have that and to be so close to home, that's really neat to have all
Uh-huh.
those connections. So
Yes.
so as you were putting this book together, you're researching it, you're talking with people, you're writing it. When did you start to weave in, other people reading and giving you feedback? And your editor is going to give you one kind of
Mhm.
feedback, and but you are also involving, like you were mentioning, like family members or
Mhm.
maybe someone from, a historical preservation aspect or what had. How did you incorporate those different how did you determine who to ask and incorporate their feedback?
Yeah, I think I have sort of a pool of people that I choose from, for different projects, and I have wonderful friends and colleagues that help me out. But with Betty's book, everybody loves Disney and everybody loves Corella. So I had sort of a line of people, saying, yeah, yeah, I'll read this one, I'll read this one. I won't necessarily read your other books, they're a little boring, but this one looks really fun. So they like this one because it's Disney. But yeah, I think really the people that contributed. So I start with revisiting my list of folks that maybe have given interviews or given quotes or what have you, and go back and say, hey, thank you so much for your contribution. Would you mind maybe reading this or looking over a few things to see if you have any suggestions or feedback? And most of the time they are thrilled to do that, and even if it's not necessarily a subject that they are super interested in, that I think we all love to give our opinion and our feedback, and so I think it's great to involve other folks in this piecing together of a puzzle, because it's certainly not just about me. Primarily it's about the subject, but I think that's what's great about it is to include just the collaboration of a lot of other people that are still around that could, give something meaningful to the story. And so I think, yeah, I think I got a lot of great feedback early on. I sort of tier it in terms of, having certain people in on the beginning and then sort of in the middle of the stickiness of the process and then certainly at the end too. And yeah, I think it just the more people that the more quality feedback that you can get, I think that is what makes these kinds of projects so rich.
So how did you structure your book?
So I kind of, with these radio biographies, they're not really a series. I guess they're kind of an unofficial series, but they're kind of similar in terms of just the chronological way that I tell the story. There are some overlaps in these books because we're talking about the same era, uh, for many of them, but it kind of unfolds. I mean, I kind of just let it go where it's going to go. And then I just go back and make sure that it's at least somewhat chronological. You can't always, when you're looking in hindsight at a story, there is going to be some overlap with, well, this is how it was then, but let me go ahead and tell you about how it is today, or this is what this means. So it's not a completely immersive experience, for the reader, but I do keep that in mind because I try really hard not to interpret or qualify all along the way. But I think there is some benefit to doing that, at least somewhat. But the structure has become, I guess the answer is twofold. It's similar with these books, but it's also, I start out kind of open-minded and say, okay, well, let's see what the story has to say for itself.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I was curious to hear what you would where your thoughts were for it. In my mind, I
Yeah.
was thinking of that person's life as almost being the backbone, and then you're
Mhm.
kind of weaving in the other points that might not be as known or connecting them a little bit better so it feels a little bit more fluid versus born school,
Right.
big thing
Exactly,
here,
exactly.
big thing there, or
Yeah,
what
yeah.
have you, that there's some connection and there's some that it feels more multidimensional
Hmm.
versus just looking at a linear timeline type of thing. And that's what I was
Right.
kind of figuring, but I also saw the those key points though as really bigger drivers of the structure too.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So did you need to do anything special to be able to share the story, or perhaps if there are pictures involved? So, for instance, did you need to work with a different attorney or something in order to secure permissions to do something or secure permissions to write something? Did you have to weave in something like that in order to be able to hit publish?
Not really with these. So with it's a little different for, like, for example, the book I'm working on right now is it's about Titanic. And so that's in a sort of a different class, different category. But with these radio ladies, there's a lot of things in public domain that I can access that don't really require any kind of special permission. Of course, I give acknowledgement to these preservation societies that I mentioned because they are really, they're kind of the bedrock of my research because they have access to so many different things that I definitely isn't on the internet and I definitely would never have access to otherwise. But in terms of like photos and that sort of thing, I really try to stay away from photos. Of course, I have, the cover design, but that's kind of I have a friend that does a lot of that for me. And with those, they can kind of be creative pieces. So we're not bumping into copyright and that sort of thing. But again, time is on my side with that because, again, a lot of these things are in public domain because of the era that we're talking about. But yeah, I really try to stay away from, you know, photos that are like
Yeah.
inside the book and that kind of thing. I wish I didn't have to shy away from that because they are wonderful, wonderful illustrations that could help, tell the story perhaps more fully. But yeah, and I think like in the first book with Virginia Gregg, her family provided me with some photos that, I certainly had permission to use. And so I could say, courtesy of her
Mm.
family. And so that's always a great thing to be able to do. But sometimes it's just not possible to do that. And so you have to think, well, we have the internet. So if, people are curious about this person and this time of their life or that, maybe they could just kind of go on Google and check it out. But yeah, I really try to be careful with that because that's awfully sticky sometimes when you get into copyright and the permissions and everything. So,
Yeah, but those pictures that are, to your point, like the family member saying this is
hmm
courtesy of, or I wanted you to see this, or if you want to include it, you can. Even
hmm
if you don't include it, what it might do also is spark that creativity or kind of add some more dimension for you as you are writing. And
Hmm.
then so that still is a form of research and a form of inspiration. It's just showing up a
Hmm.
little differently.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So you mentioned a new book that you're writing. I think I heard that.
Oh, yes,
Oh
yes,
my
you did.
goodness. That is very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. It's I have one that's supposed to come out at some point this year. It's hanging out with the publisher right now, so we'll see when they want to when they want to release it. But that is it's a biography, but it's also a true crime. And so it's about actress Susan Cabot, who was murdered by her son in 1986. And that
Oh
story
gosh.
has it really has gone untold from a feministic perspective in terms of let's look at, the issues surrounding kind of what led to her murder and her legacy preservation because, it got a little murky, of course, with the trials and court records and everything being in the newspapers. So that one is said to come out sometime this year. I don't know. But the Titanic book, yes, my deadline is tomorrow. So I think I have it ready, but are we ever really ready? I don't know. But yeah, it goes out tomorrow, and that is through a publisher in Belfast, which is really cool because that's where Titanic was built.
Hmm.
So that's a pretty cool thing. But yeah, that process has been really interesting because it's technically about a survivor of Titanic, the Countess of Roths. And so it's like a biography on her, but it's interesting because in the book, she kind of vies for center stage with Titanic because it's sort of a biography of Titanic as an entity. And it's a really fascinating story and one that hasn't been told before. The Countess has had a few mentions like on Downton Abbey and the Titanic film in 97 and that sort of thing. But this is like the first full length, biography on her and her dance with Titanic. So it's a little bit different, of course, than what I'm used to, but I think the same approach applies. It's still a biography. And so letting the story tell itself, I think is the thing.
Okay, I love the fact that you the Titanic is a character and she is a character and
Yeah.
how she's somewhat competing. I
Yeah,
because but
yeah.
I think that that's a really great way to explain it is that sometimes there is an an object that can be a character if you choose to kind of use it that way because
Hmm.
it can become another main character. It could become an antagonist in its own way just because it can be something that that main character protagonist is bumping up against or working with or relating to in some way. So I love that you said that she's somewhat in competition with the Titanic itself. That's
Yes.
amazing. That
Yes.
is
Yes.
amazing. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, you said that it's due to the publisher
Hmm.
and question if it, yes, there's always that, is it ready? Is it ready? But how will you know that you feel really good? I mean, I realize the deadline's there, which is
Right.
helpful, but you still need to feel good about that. How will you know?
Yes. I don't know, I think it's kind of this sounds maybe a little hokey, but I think it's kind of a spiritual experience for me in terms of just does it feel like is the essence of the manuscript done? I mean, is there a sense of closure and can I move on from that? Because I get really involved in these projects, of course. And when it's done, that means, okay, we got to move on and we're going to move on to the next one. And so I think there's almost like, again, it sounds kind of hokey, but I think there's almost a little bit of a grieving process that goes into that because, for example, the books on my shelf that I've written, they represent times in my personal life too, because I can say, well, I was getting to know Betty during this season of my life, or I was getting to know Virginia in this season of my life. And so they're very, very intertwined with my own personal narrative. And so I think when I can say, yeah, okay, I think I have told the story and I think that I can move on from it. I think that's kind of when I say, all right, we'll press the send button. It goes out into space. So yeah, that's the short answer is it's kind of a spiritual feeling out of when it's done more than just black and white.
Totally agree with you. I'm right
Hmm.
in the head, same space with you. It's not hokey to me at
Yeah,
all. It's
good.
because it's
That's good.
exactly what I think. It's exactly
Hmm.
how I feel about my own pieces, whether I'm writing my own or editing someone else's.
Hmm.
There is that feeling of, okay, I I've taken this. This is I feel good about this.
Hmm.
This is ready to go to its
Yes.
next step, wherever that is. So
Hmm.
totally agree. Love
Yeah.
it. Lana, this has been awesome.
Yeah, this has been awesome. I love this.
Where can people connect with you? Where can they get your books?
Yeah, so I'm on Amazon. All the books are on Amazon. I do have a website too, and it's lonabaileyWrites.com. And I'm on Facebook. But yes, my website and certainly Facebook is just Dr. Lona Bailey, and you can find me there.
Awesome. Lana,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being on the show. This
Yes.
has been fantastic.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate it.